take their seats. We're going to begin the program. So good evening. I'm Rachel Lutz, President of the Samaritan Charitable Society of Salem. Thank you so much for being here tonight. On behalf of the Samaritans Board, we are overwhelmed by the attendance and support of all of you. Before we begin, I would like to introduce Mayor Dominic Pengalo of Salem, who would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Rachel. Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the City of Salem, welcome to this evening's conversation. I'd like to start by thanking the Samaritan Charitable Society of Salem for convening this discussion and the PBD Essex Museum for graciously hosting it. To the panelists, the moderator, our keynote speaker, Reverend Walker, Dr. Jim, welcome and thank you all for taking the time to talk with our community about this timely and critical issue. And to all of you who are here tonight, thank you. Thank you for being part of a constructive dialogue about what we as neighbors, as compassionate individuals, as community leaders, what we can do to recognize the multifaceted challenges presented by homelessness and how we can strive to overcome them together. There are many aspects of homelessness. Many, perhaps the vast majority of the unhoused, are living in silence and in shadows, doubled up with other families, asleep in cars, enduring the insecurity of living in temporary emergency shelters. Some are new arrivals, whose story in Salem began in the last few weeks. Many others are longtime residents, our neighbors whose Salem story began generations ago. Homelessness and housing insecurity is agnostic to whether someone is new to Salem or been part of our community for years. Today, there are 220 homeless students in the Salem Public Schools, almost double the number from this time last year. Nearly 6% of our enrolled students are homeless, and many more are housing insecure, families on the cusp of crisis. How can we expect them to succeed in class when they aren't secure in their housing? How can we give them the foundation for academic achievement when they're facing the trauma of living without a stable roof over their head? How is that fair of us? It's not. And we'll never fully address homelessness if we aren't willing to talk about homes. Housing is how we can help pull those residents and those families back from the brink of crisis. Fewer new housing units were created in Salem in the last full decade than in the average decade of the 20th century. For every 4 low-income families in Salem today, there's 1 deed-restricted affordable unit. In the last decade in Salem, the average family income increased by 8%. The average home price increased by 50%. In the last year alone, the average rent increased by 13%. Salem is fast becoming unaffordable and out of reach to far too many families, seniors, and neighbors. It's changing the character of our community, and certainly not in a good way. So I hope you can leave here tonight with an aligned commitment for taking positive action tomorrow, because no one, especially none of those 220 Salem kids, deserves to wait a day longer for a home. Thank you again to the panelists, to the Samaritans, and to all of you for taking the time to be here tonight.
Thank you, Dominic, for being here. I would like to welcome and thank all the city and state representatives here tonight. And thank you to the Massachusetts Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing for sponsoring the ASL interpreters. Also, thank you to the creators of the Off the Grid project, which is a photography project To the left, the Susan Ogan, Karen Bowden are the creators of the project. And we have Joanne Paul, who is one of the photographers here in the front row. The project was done in 2016, and the photos were taken for people experiencing homelessness, living in a night shelter. So I hope you take the time to view the photographs. So my remarks will be brief because we are here tonight to hear from a lot of experts on the crisis of homelessness. The Samaritans started in Salem in 1832, and 191 years later, our mission remains the same: to provide occasional financial assistance to those in less fortunate circumstances. Our goal is to help the recipients lift themselves up into a better position with a brighter future. Today, oftentimes our financial assistance can prevent the recipients from becoming homeless and losing their housing. This is what inspired us to plan tonight's symposium. Our goal for tonight is to bring the community together to learn more about homelessness and how it affects all of us. I would like to recognize and thank the Samaritans board members for all their time and effort organizing this event, and also for their dedication and passion to our mission. The board members are a pleasure to work with, and we make a great team. Will all board members please stand? The Samaritans is 100% funded by donations from individuals and some businesses. We also receive a grant from the Salem City Trust Fund, and the mayor is the chair of the Trust Fund board, so we thank you, Mayor. I would like to extend a big thank you to our sponsors and donors, especially the lead sponsor, the Birch Ives Family Charitable Foundation. Without your support, this event would not be possible. A list of sponsors in your program. So thank you to the sponsors. Also, thank you to the staff of the PBD Essex for accommodating us so we can be in this beautiful space. So now it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Jim O'Connell. Dr. O'Connell is the founding physician of the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program, which he founded 38 years ago. He has been treating people on the streets of Boston since 1985. Please read more about Dr. O'Connell in your program. The mission of Boston Healthcare is to ensure unconditionally equitable and dignified access to the highest quality health care for all individuals and families experiencing homelessness in the Boston community. We are very fortunate and honored to have Dr. O'Connell with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming him.
Wow, thank you very much, Rachel, for that introduction. And it's such an honor to be here. It's a much bigger crowd than I thought sitting around a fireplace here. I would love to, it's also my first time ever at the PBD Essex Museum, and this is phenomenal. So congratulations for what you get to have in your city. I can't ignore the off-the-grid photographs, and I didn't realize we have one of the photographers right with us, but those photographs were in the main corridor of Mass General for a whole month one time, and we looked at them every single day, and they are breathtaking, so thank you for that. I also cannot escape thanking Deb and Jeff Beal for taking us to dinner, so Liz and Julie and I got to sit for dinner over at the Hawthorne Inn, and that was a delightful thing, and I will tell you one story. Jeff happened to say that he's a member of the museum board, and I was like very impressed, and I'm looking out the window and it's the Salem Witch Museum that I'm looking at. So I happened to say, wow, so you're a member of the board, and boy did I hear about it after that. But anyway, so sorry about that, Jeff, wherever you are. I'm so sorry that I went that way. In thinking about what to do, by the way, there's several people here in the audience who I owe a lot to and are doing phenomenal work, and I'm sorry that I can't say thank you to all of you, but I have to at least acknowledge Amanda, wherever Amanda Grant Rose, who's over there, who I worked with in Boston for years when she was taking care of people at the cathedral, and now as she's running Winter Walk, which is one of the real wonderful charities that happens each winter when they do a walk in the middle of winter to commemorate what homeless people go through. So Amanda, great to see you. Thank you for being here. And so I thought I only have about 15 or 20 minutes, and I thought maybe the best way to sort of set the tone for the night is to just there's about 3 stories I'd love to tell you that are people who sort of illustrate not only the complexity of homelessness, but kind of the real humanity of the people that all of you who are in this field know that as you get to know the people who are suffering through this or experiencing homelessness for years, what you start to see is are lives of real courage and resilience. And the longer you get to know people, the more awestruck you become by looking at them. But let me start by this is the slide that I like to start with. When we got started 38 years ago, we were started by a grant that was given to Mayor Flynn, the mayor of Boston, along with about 18 other cities in the country. And one of the requirements was that there needed to be a group of stakeholders who would say what our program would look like. I'm still a resident at the hospital, so I have nothing to do with this, and didn't even know what was going on. But a group of people, and this is a later version of them, all of whom were homeless or had experienced homelessness, got together and they told the mayor how they wanted to have their health care. And they had a very different lens to look through than most of us who are doctors and looking at a different way. And what they wanted was continuity of care. They wanted to be treated the same as everybody else. They also said something that has always struck with us, that they wanted to be all about social justice and not charity. So, for example, I had gotten every friend I knew to sort of help out in this program. We were going to volunteer on different times. And they decided they did not want a single volunteer because that smacked of charity. And volunteerism is what I really believe in and still to this day cherish. But from their perspective, they wanted doctors and nurses who were going to stick with them, who were going to be there day and night. Interesting thing. And anyway, they also insisted that they needed to be part of the design and the implementation and the governance of our program. So to this day, we have several people who have come from our Consumer Advisory Board who are on our board of directors. And I look at this picture and I cherish it because it was taken probably in 1993 or 94, maybe 93. And they were monumental people in the development of our program. And all of them are dead now except the one man standing on the left who is still on our board of directors. His name is Derek, and I know Liz has spent time getting to know Derek. And he is amazing in articulating what he has been through and what healthcare providers need to pay attention to. So I will just stop by saying that we have been blessed by being directed by the people we serve. Something I didn't get a chance to do when I was working in the hospital. This is a very different world. Let me see if I can make this go. So one quick story about this woman who really made a difference in my life. She was a woman who called herself a bag lady, always dressed in the worst rags, used to surround her. She slept outside on a stoop by South Station. And the way she would keep the world away is she would just put smelly stuff all around her. She would buy milk that she would leave for 2 months, eggs, boiled eggs that would just sit there rancidly for months. And when we would go out in the van, I was spending a couple nights a week or have been with the Pine Street van, and our goal was to just get her a sandwich or something, and it was we had to take turns who would go near enough to be able to get through that. But it was really amazing. It was her defense. Nobody, that was her protection. But anyway, she she was a heavy drinker. She went to Mass General in the early 90s and had a blood transfusion and got hepatitis C, which at that time we were not screening blood for. And so she got hepatitis C, continued to drink a little bit too much alcohol, and went on to get cirrhosis of the liver and was going to die unless she could get a liver transplant. And I don't know how many of you have to deal with this, but it's incredibly difficult to get on the list to get a liver transplant, especially if you're homeless and don't have a stable residence. So she agreed to come we have a respite program. It's a step-down hospital where people can come who are really sick, maybe not so sick to be in the hospital, but way too sick to be out on the streets or in the shelters. And so she came in and agreed that she would stick with us for 6 months, and we kept, every week we'd send a urine sample to the surgeons to show that she wasn't drinking, and then she did really well and stuck with it. much to my surprise. And as it got to be 6 months down the road and she's now getting up to the top of the list, she called me in one morning. It was a Sunday morning, I'll never forget. She said, would I please take her picture? And up until that time, I don't think I had taken a picture of any homeless person's face because I thought that was pretty invasive, pretty voyeuristic or something. And so I took that picture. She got all dressed up. She put a linen dress on. I don't know if you can appreciate that. She's got lipstick on. She has her hair up in a bun, fingernail polish. And she even went outside. This was at our old respite program. She went outside and got some flowers and put them in her styrofoam cup to be on the bedside bed. And I took the picture. And I brought it back to her. And what I didn't say is my goal in life had to become an oncologist. I was really fascinated by cancer. And I was initially doing this job just for a year or two before I went on to do that. And I kept getting delayed. So I right away thought, you know what? She is really scared of this big operation coming up, which she could live or die through. And so she must be facing death and all sorts of things are going. So I brought her the picture and sat down to talk to her about death. And, you want to talk about it. And she put her arm around me and said, oh my gosh, son, I've lived outside on the streets for 27 years and I face death every single night. She said, I face violence, all that stuff. She said, in most of those nights, I would have welcomed death. So I'm not afraid of death. And then she went on to tell me that she had 2 daughters. One was 5 years old and the other was 3 years old when she last saw them and lost them 27, 28 years ago. And so she told me that what she wanted was a picture of her looking relatively presentable, just in case those 2 daughters ever went looking for their birth mother and there would be a picture for her. And of course, it kind of broke my heart, made me want to cry. But it was the first time I realized that some of the people we serve really want to not be invisible. They want to have their stories told and be as these photographs do. Show the world the courage and really what people are enduring. So anyway, what was most interesting for me when I came back, I gave her that picture. I came back she was in our respite program, came back a couple days later, and there were 22 people who asked me to take their portraits. And then we had to change our whole thinking about that. Many people really are honored by pictures. This is 25 years ago or something. And if you come to our respite program now, we have portraits up of everybody. And when somebody comes in and gets admitted who doesn't have a portrait, there's a real price to pay. So we have to get it up quickly. But that was just something I would never, I tell you that story because it completely flabbergasted me. I just would never have predicted that. And then this is, in the story of continuity of care, this is a gentleman who we grew to all love. Anyone who's worked in Boston probably knows him. His name was Mike, and he's very okay about using his name. And he lived on the streets from the time I got there. 1985, he was living on the streets all night long, wandering around. He was hyperkinetic. As he would say, has probably used a little bit too much cocaine to keep himself going. But he had incredible street smarts. He would get to know people. He used to stem or ask for money outside of the Starbucks, which is on the corner of Charles Street and Beacon Street. He was known by lots and lots of people on Beacon Hill, and if you've ever gone there, you would know him. And he would learn your name, and each time you come, he'd say, hi, Miss Susan, can you give me a little money? So he was a genius at that. Turns out, and I used to provide the care for him, and the truth is he couldn't read or write. He never had gotten through school because he was hyperactive, never got the kind of services that he needed, and so ends up on the streets really with all these incredible talents, but really devastated by what he had been through. So, and this is him sort of giving you the look outside of, I'm sorry, that's a little dark, you probably can't see his face, but I'll never forget, he was one of the people that over the years we finally, he got sick. We had him in our McGinnis house, and then he went to our step-down McGinnis house. And during that time, we were able to get him, with the help of a lot of the people you would know, one of the low-income or low-threshold housing first programs. And so this is the day he signed his lease. And you can see his thing. He'd never, he's now 64 years old. He's never had his own place. And we were jubilant. He finally had a place to go. And he went to this great place. It was in Roxbury. And we would visit him at home, and he had a cat that he cherished. He wouldn't even come out of the house because he was afraid the cat would run away. And we would do all the care that we could at his home. And he would calls I'd never forget, I'd be driving home, it'd be 8 o'clock at night, and he'd call and page and say he needs a meatball sub from the same old place in Jamaica Plain. So I realized that doctoring, for sometimes it really means getting the right sandwich at the right time to the right place. Anyway, so he went on. He came in one day and he had lymph nodes all over. It turned out he had prostate cancer that was metastatic everywhere. So we got him through, he was a favorite at the chemotherapy spot upstairs at Mass General. In fact, I'll never forget visiting him when he was getting his chemotherapy. He's in a bed, the nurses are helping him, he's got snacks in front of here, he's watching a TV, and he said, "This is the best that's ever happened." And he's the only patient I've ever known who would say this is the best that's ever happened. But he went on to eventually really be disabled and not able to really live at home. And we had the hardest time getting him to come in for hospice care because he didn't want to leave his cat. So, typical of the duties that many of you will know. So our physician assistant, who's really wonderful, took his cat home and took care of the cat so that he would come in for hospice care. He's at Mass General as we're waiting for him to go to the hospice care, and he's literally on death's doornail. And I get this call from him saying, I need a Big Mac, but it can't have any lettuce on it, okay? And I'm sitting there going, "Mike, you're dying. They just said no comfort measures only, you're dying now." So I went to Mass General to give him this, and he's looking like he's an extremist, but he sits up and he eats this Big Mac. And I realize, crawling into someone else's eyes can sometimes be very hard, but this is what gave him great joy. And you can see that smile. And he was about 3 days after that, he was dead. But when he died, there was a service for him, as maybe you know, there's a round church, it's a church at the top of the hill, church on the hill at Beacon Hill, and there was a service for him. And you would be amazed. I don't think Mike understood this in his real life, but there were tons of people from Beacon Hill, all of whom knew him from those days, and the outpouring of support from the community was unbelievably awesome. And I keep thinking that Mike, while he had a terrible life, he was really cared for by the community near the end, and it was really gratifying. And then I'm going to finish with one story of a woman who was incredibly dear to us, but also very complicated, very irascible, but totally lovable. And she, this is Susie, who also doesn't mind us using her name, by the way, who used to sell spare change. In fact, she was the star spare change seller down at Downtown Crossing. And she knew everybody. She knew how to work the crowd. And the spare change was a homeless newspaper. They would sell it for $1. They would buy it for 25 cents and sell it for $1, and that's how people could make their money. And the newspaper was great. I would buy it all the time. But she was well known. If anybody else came to sell spare change anywhere near her block, she would read them the riot act quickly. And Susie came to Boston with her partner, who's Walter, who is here. They'd come up from Florida, where they had felt the rules and restrictions on homeless people were just too much. They had been arrested for having a bag with an open can of beer in it. And they were arrested and had to spend 3 nights in jail or something like that. So they came to Boston, lived on the streets, always delightful to run into on the van at nighttime. She was always full of stories. Walter was a veteran, a little more taciturn than Susie, but they were a couple. And they used to come to the clinic, I think, all the time. This is Susie at our clinic. We have a Thursday street clinic at Mass General, and this is her entertaining everybody with our students and our other doctors and patients. And then, she would do things like Christmas time. She was just full of life. And her problem was, she would say, she liked her beverages a little too much, and that was her way of saying, and there was a rule that we couldn't talk about that. We could talk about everything else, her heart failure, her lung disease, she had carpal tunnel syndrome, but beverages were off limit to talk about. So we had to learn how to work around that. And so Susie and Walter put their money together. He had a check, a disability check from the VA, and they put their money together and they roomed up with another homeless man who was living in the back of this apartment. It's a bar, which is pretty much closed down. And if you can see that back door, the back white door, they lived in that, which was a storage room to that, and they had made it into an apartment. They lived there for about 2 years. It's on Main Street in Charlestown, just before you get to Somerville. And we used to go visit them at home, and it was horrible. It was barely running water, and it was no heat. But that's where they lived instead of being on the street. And then they were able to put their money together, and they rented this apartment in Revere on the beach. And the reason that arrow is there, because if you notice, Revere Beach is all getting gentrified. There's beautiful buildings going up. And they were in the last, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Up, but it's like the last house left. And they were up on the second floor where that arrow goes, right across from the beach, though. And they could, with their 2 checks, they could pay the rent and be left with about $100 to spend for the rest of the month. So talk about poverty. And this, I remember we're on the way to visit her, and this is Revere Beach. And as Susie and Walter said, geez, we've never had time. They lived there 7 years, never had time to get to the beach. So go figure. And then when she was doing a program and they asked her, what do you want in life? What would you like? And I never forget seeing this. It was on her wall. She wanted a boat with a captain and crew, a Learjet, of course. And then she wanted a car with a driver, which has always been my dream. If I make a lot of money, I'm going to have a driver. And then she said, and plenty of money to keep all those things going. So I thought, she had the right idea. The problem was, this apartment was on the second floor. There were 7 steps to get to the first floor, and then this set of stairs. I'm actually, looking at it. I don't know if you can appreciate it. I'm looking down the stairs. I'm looking down the stairs, and those are treacherous steps. And she was very unsteady on her feet. So the number of falls down those stairs and head trauma and broken bones was just astonishing. And try as we couldn't get them into a first floor apartment because, as you know, handicapped apartments are almost impossible to get. But anyway, the real story of Susie is that she would tell us that, she once had a life. And she told us that she was a singer. She graduated from Potsdam State in upstate New York. She was a singer with a band. They opened for Sha Na Na. She was very proud of opening for Sha Na Na. And she would show us pictures of her in the band before. And she even said, when I was born, my dad was I think he was whatever it was. He was can't remember now, but this was when she was born. She said, here's when I was born. It was the first showing of a new 1952 deluxe model, and it was this great thing of Holden's Screamliner. And she had that up on the wall as well. And then this was all the things about her. Barbara Susie, 2 lung power, free squealing, knee action, changeable seat covers, water-cooled exhaust, and all those things, the characteristics of a new baby. You can tell she must have been in some loving family situation. And then Susie had fallen down and would frequently go to rehab. And when she was in rehab, she would, for everybody, play the piano, even though she had one hand that she could not really move because of carpal tunnel syndrome. But she still played and sang relatively beautifully. And so we didn't really know what the story was. And I think I have this. What am I doing? And we found this in her. She had an old sequin gown that she used to wear. It was in her closet. She had saved it through all her things. And this was the picture of her when she was a singer back in, whenever it was, in the 1980s. And then some ex-boyfriend sent us one day a recording of her when she was singing. And I'm going to leave you with this because it just takes your breath away. This woman who lived on the streets forever, really struggled. She died about, I'm going to guess about 2 years ago, really sadly. But I hope this plays. Let me see if it goes. I'm going to hope here, but who knows? Oh no, maybe it doesn't. Oh, I'm going to be bummed. Is there sound? Go back one more. Let's see, back one more. Should go now, right? Oh. We'll go back. Thank you. If anybody knows these things, please help. One more. So, but this isn't it, though. Click on that. It's on this. It usually plays on this. Anyway, let me leave it at that. Trust me, it's the most beautiful singing you've ever heard, okay? So Susie taught us that the lives people have had before they become homeless is something you need to cherish and appreciate. We've learned that we believe everything that everybody tells us because most people have led pretty extraordinary journeys to get to where they are. And I think if there's anything tonight, please, appreciate that. And I think we're going to hear from our panel, all the struggles and all the things that go on that the folks we take care of have to go through, and I'm sure all of you could attest to that in great ways. And I apologize that I can't do that. The last picture I'll show you and get off is that we realize, as you all know, that we don't do this alone. We do it because we live in a village, and it takes a village to do all that. And this is a picture taken at a little park at Mass General where a lot of homeless people used to hang out. It's now been plowed under to make for a new building. But you know, I love this picture because it was a medical student in the front or it was an undergraduate student who was on her way to medical school. And this picture is old enough now that she's now a full functioning orthopedic surgeon at the Brigham. But she was on her way, and the homeless people had been so taken by how kind she was in the clinic for a year and a half that they all came out for a picture when she was on her way to Johns Hopkins Medical School. But you can see it's the police, it's the volunteers, it's homeless people, it's lots of staff, you know, from doctors and nurses and social workers, you know, and caseworkers and psychiatrists, and everybody together. And interesting, if you look really carefully, most of the people on that slide who were homeless are now dead. It's also where, as Amanda will know, that was the place where we used to do a yearly memorial service for everyone who had died. So let me leave it there because I could go on forever, but I'm sorry about the music, but really appreciate that you've given me a chance to be here tonight. What an honor. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Liz in the panel at this point. I don't know how I pass this off. Can I just pass this off? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Those stories are amazing, and your work is amazing. Thank you. So before introducing our panelists, I want to acknowledge the many people who partner with us and who provide support to those who have no home. A list of these organizations is in your program. There are representatives from these organizations here tonight. So anybody here, please stand so the audience can see just how many partners we have who are involved in this work. I know there are many people here, but thank you. Any number of them could have been on this panel. Our goal was to create a panel that represented different faces of the issue: individuals and families, children and young adults, temporary and permanent shelter, older and younger, and people who have actually experienced being without a home. So actually, if the panelists could please come up and take a seat. Oh, okay.
Is it?
Yeah. So please meet our panel. Jason Etheridge, Executive Director of LifeBridge North Shore. Jason, please stand. Rachel Hand, Executive Director of Family Promise North Shore, Boston. Veronica Miranda, Salem School Committee member. And Salem Housing Authority Commissioner. Felicia Pierce, Deputy Director of North Shore CDC. Alphonse Wright, Chair of the Salem Human Rights Coalition. And Dr. Jim O'Connell. Your program includes the impressive bios for all tonight's participants. And I have one more very important introduction. I think many of you know about our panel discussion moderator, Dr. Liz Walker. We are so honored and fortunate to have Reverend Walker with us tonight. She is a retired Presbyterian minister, founder of the Corey Johnson Foundation, and former broadcast journalist for WBZ in Boston. And currently, she is in the process of writing a book. So welcome, Reverend Walker, and the stage is yours.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. All right. I'm a preacher, so I need call and response, right? I am so excited about being here this evening for so many reasons. I understand there are lots of people from the media here, and that's wonderful. There are friends here I haven't seen in a while, and that's wonderful. But I got to be honest with you, the real reason I came to this is because of Jim O'Connell. Back in the day, when I was in TV, I always wanted to be around celebrities and basketball players, and Bob Lobel would give me tickets to the Celtics game, or maybe he wouldn't. But the older I get, and this is the sermon, the older I get, the more I want to be around righteous people. I got to tell you, the times are so uncertain. Now, here's why y'all shouldn't have invited me up here, because I am a preacher, and that's what I like to do. But the times are so uncertain, and things are so frightening, that you kind of have to make your decision about who you want to hang with, because you never know what's going to happen in life. You just don't know. Jim is the kind of person you want to be around, because look where we are tonight. We're with Jim and all these other righteous people who are doing the only work that matters. This is the work that matters. And so I am delighted to be a part of it. My role is just to keep things going. We're going to ask questions, and we're going to have conversation here for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to leave the last 15 minutes, not much time, but the point for you to get up and ask questions too, so we can have a lively discussion. And all I wanted to say in going into that is, one of the issues that we face as a culture and a society is the stigma that is associated with things. The stigma of mental illness, the stigma of homelessness. And so when we think about homelessness, often we think about mass and cash. We think about all of the stresses and the hopelessness and the drug addiction and the crime and all of the problems that are there. And those are very real problems, and those are very real people. But as Jim has told you, this is a complicated situation. When I was a pastor at Roxbury Presbyterian Church in Roxbury, we had a couple of families who lived in their cars and came to church every Sunday. So you think you might know the face of homelessness, but you don't. But something has changed, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We have experts from every area of this subject, and the first question we're going to discuss is, how did we get here? We are at a point of crisis, it seems, in the country, in Boston, in New York, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles. So, Dr. Jim, I was going to ask you to start this. How do you think we got to this point of crisis? And that's kind of a big question, but I know you'll be able to bring it to a...
It is a big question, Liz, and I would...
That was me, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You know, the first thing I would say is it is incredibly complicated. So how we got here also is incredibly complicated. But there's no question we got here because for a whole host of reasons, we as a country stopped investing in low-income housing, while the numbers of people who needed that went escalating. We stopped, for example, we deinstitutionalized those people who were suffering from mental illness so that they came out of hospitals. We went from 800,000 beds down to 200,000 around the country, and all of those people had to go somewhere. We were supposed to provide community service for them, and we didn't do it very well. So they ended up eventually, after being in rooming houses, they eventually ended up on the streets. And then if you, certainly our experience in Boston is we used to have about 3,000 sort of rooming houses, SROs, single room occupancies, in the south end of Boston. And as that property became very valuable, all of those were gentrified and don't exist anymore. So when you put all those things together, and then the backdrop I always think about is the increasing inequity between those who make a lot of money and those who don't is actually astonishing. And not surprisingly, particularly in major cities that have high rents and very low vacancies, you start to see the problem of homelessness just escalate. And I could go on, but I say that would be the foundation that I would think about in this.
That's a great way to start. And I was going to follow up with Rachel and Jason if you wanted to add anything, or if anyone wants to add anything to that, how we got to this point and this crisis. Rachel? Sure.
I think one thing I would add is that not only, though I agree 100% with all of those reasons for why we're in a crisis right now, I think it's a lack of housing and it's incredibly low wages. And I also think that what we've seen in terms of a trend of like what I think most people assume the face of homelessness tends to be chronically homeless individuals that are outside stayers that you see very visibly, and you don't necessarily associate homelessness with people you don't identify as homeless, right? And so what I've seen in my career and in the most recent years is that the faces of homelessness look more and more like every single person in this room. And that's because homelessness is now affecting people who have full-time jobs, people who have 2 jobs, people who, we worked with 3 families in the last month at the same time locally. They were all Beverly Salem families. All 3 families were fully employed. One of the mothers that we worked with was employed at Dunkin' Donuts, another one was a bank teller, and all 3 of them were sleeping in their cars with their children. And so I think along with the root causes of homelessness being based on the fact that there's not enough housing and the wages are so low, and these 3 mothers are good examples of that. They had full-time jobs, but they couldn't afford any housing in Massachusetts. I think what we've also seen is that the demographic of homelessness has now become basically anyone can experience it, and homelessness looks like any single one of us. So that's what I would add.
And I would agree with both. I would also want to drive home the point that what we're seeing is happening at the same time. A varying socioeconomic status, sure, a raging behavioral and mental health crisis, lack of affordable housing, but all at the same time. And that's different. And we run the risk of it getting worse. And I think that's the point of us talking through this, because as a provider, we don't see it getting better, right? And there's a lot of work to do to help get through some of these. So I just wanted to add, one of the differences, it's all happening at the same time.
Okay. Did anyone else want to add? I'm going to confess right now, I have forgotten my love's name. I forgot your name. Felicia. Miss Felicia.
I knew I was Love. So I work for North Shore Community Development Coalition, so we build affordable housing. So Dr. Jim, Jason, and Rachel were right, is that it really is due to a lack of affordable housing, right? And so recently we started a project that we actually were able to complete one building. We have one building that we're still trying to wait to get finished and zoned. And we had 47 apartments, affordable apartments, 40% and 60% AMI. And what we found was that over 2,500 people applied for 47. And it was 2,500 families and individuals that applied for only 47 apartments and homes. And so that just speaks to the volume that there really is when it comes to the need for affordable housing. We're a private affordable housing developer, of course, and we're not like a public like Salem Housing Authority, but it is very hard to acquire funding to continue to build, and also trying to find space in cities. A lot of cities are hesitant to include more affordable housing. They've reached the cap that is needed. And people always say, not in my backyard, but the reality is it is in our backyard, and it's our backyard now.
And I know you could take this, Alphonse, but I think I'm going to move on to the next question because we have lots of questions. And the second one that I was going to ask for Alphonse and Veronica, how does homelessness affect different people? I mean, we all think of it in one way, but certainly a family isn't in the same situation as an individual. I'll ask you, you want to start with that, Veronica?
Sure. So in my experience as a mom who experienced homelessness with a child, I would say that similar to what Jason was mentioning, it's a really complex issue. Not only was it difficult to worry about the housing aspect, but then you're maintaining a job, you are simultaneously trying to secure childcare. And I would say that through that process, you really realize where the gaps are in our state system and the barriers that are in our policies that are creating unwinnable situations for many people. So I can't speak to the individual experience. Alphonse definitely can, but it's very layered.
Thank you. So I experienced homelessness twice. Once when I was in high school, and once in the late '90s. So I'm 30 years or so removed from the experience of people experiencing it today. But I'd say it's depending on who you ask. The benchmarks or metrics for success or getting through the day changes because I didn't have a child to worry about. I was either a teenager or a young adult. I also served in the Marines, so I covered myself up with leaves and dirt when I slept, so people would leave me alone. I didn't have to worry about another life, and so there's like people said, it's complex. There's no one answer to this, and I think that again, to Veronica's point, some of the systems we have in place keep you there as presentation I think you've made before called the poverty trap. So it's a zero-sum game. You can't get ahead. You get ahead, the system finds ways to keep you back. And I think we need to address that. And this is a crisis now only because, like some people said, people have realized that can affect everybody. It's always been a crisis. And like I said, my metric for getting through the day is going to be different than Felicia's or Veronica's or Rachel's or Jason's because we have different needs, and we need a better safety net. Because I'm not an expert in anything except I'm the only authority is my own experience, and so I can't tell you what anybody else, like the 10 unhoused people that we passed coming in here. Let's be real. All right, so this is not a faraway problem. Literally, it's outside of our door, and we need to be helping people here. And like Felicia said, the NIMBYs. I'm sorry, if it's not going to be in your backyard, it's going to be somebody else's backyard. So if you want to be righteous, take a stand and stand up for this now.
If you look at the world situation right now, the whole world is homeless. We're going through a whole phase of displacement everywhere. People are trying to get to a new country, but we keep putting some kind of moral judgment on top of it. So my first question, and I'll throw it out to any of you, where did that come from? Who started that?
Can I take it? At least take a first stab at it, because I think it's a very layered. I personally feel that when you can assign the cause of homelessness to the individual or the family that is experiencing it, it removes the blame from you, right? So the morality argument that someone is maybe less than or doesn't have as strong will as someone else, right? Let's be honest, there are plenty of people with lots of money who experience substance use disorder, but not all of them end up homeless, right? So there's no way to truly argue that one person's experience of homelessness, whether it be caused by lack of housing because they can't afford housing or job loss, or it be caused by substance use disorder, for example, you can't blame the person, because we have so much evidence of people who live every day with substance use disorder and probably make millions. So I think that morality issue is created to kind of take the blame off of, as Alphonse was talking about and Veronica mentioned, off of the systems and the issues we have created as a society by not keeping up with the needs of the people around us. And that means building housing, increasing wages, among a million other things.
Absolutely.
You know, where did it come from, right? And it's sort of built into society that, you know, if you get something, you have to work hard for it and you have to earn it. So here we are in a you know, sort of a part of the country where we think of people coming into homeless shelters or receiving services and sort of doing something to earn what's next, right? In the front door, out the back door, into housing. It's a housing ready model, right? So we'll fix you, we'll get you up and going, and then you can definitely have a job and you're stabilized and you can get that apartment. Why? Because you earned it, right? You worked really hard. And, that's not working, right? It's there, it's part of society. I think it's part of the sort of Puritan ethic that we derive from over time. But you know, the time to start talking about housing first and bringing people in these situations where they're trying to survive and giving them the dignity of a home and stop getting caught up in having them earn it. Right, so that's, in my opinion, it comes from this idea that everything we get, we have to earn, and because I did it, you can do it. So that's just my.
No, that's exactly it. The earning, because they don't have it, they don't deserve it, and we need to get out of that trap of thinking. You're right; it is tied to our Puritan kind of, you know, next to, you know, something is cleanliness and, you know, all that stuff. But no, and also it's also tied to the bootstrap mentality that is just permeates the national dialogue, and that's also a bunch of bunk. Ooh, I almost lost it there. And there's no moral component to this. There's not. As you mentioned, people who have addiction issues. I've been in recovery for over 30 years. You know, thank you. And I was in recovery when I was homeless. So that link is already debunked. No, but I'm saying in the national dialogue. And it's the moral fiber is, I think, what really stands, the moral component is what really stands in the way of us doing what we need to do, because somewhere in the back of our minds on a national dialogue, oh, they don't have it, so they must not be worthy of it. And I'm sorry, if you're getting in the way of someone trying to survive, you've got a problem.
Anyone else?
Can I just add
Please,
something
Felicia.
to that? Because we're having a dialogue. It seems more like a dialogue. And I think it hit it right on the nail, and I'm going to put a face to it. In 2020, something happened. Everybody knows what happened in 2020. And the biggest thing was the need and cry out from people and individuals who were in fear they couldn't pay their rent, they couldn't pay their mortgage. There were people who were transient between cities and states. And I'm a social worker by trade. And to me, the proudest moment was when I was able to hand people checks over without having to say, let me see your ID, let me see your social security card, let me see your date of birth, what's your mother's maiden name, what city are you from? Because that's the reality of what the barriers are that we're able to, that those are the barriers that people face. And it was amazing to see how one of the funders for Charitable Society, ECCF, like they got together stakeholders in the community and said, we have this money, what can we do? And I think so often we put so many checklist items and barriers before people. It's true, we need housing first. You cannot keep a job without a place to go back home to. You cannot be healthy without a place to go back home to. And so really looking at the housing first model, like Jason shared.
It does, though, seem like, we've said, a complicated problem and a massive problem. How are we doing as a state? How are we doing in communities? Can anybody give me, Dr. Jim, what do you think from what your perspective? How are we doing systemically in trying to stem the tide, if you will?
I think we have around the country, and I'm sure in Salem, lots of programs that have shown us how you solve the problem, but they're all small and not scaled. And I think the moral failing in our country is that we don't have the courage to scale this up to address people. And I keep thinking, imagine everybody, there's 60,000 homeless people in LA County living on the streets. And so if you want to say, how are we going to house all those people just in LA, it's going to take a huge amount of time, effort, and money. We know how to do it, we just don't have the money to do it. So I would say at this point, it's a failure of imagination and a failure of willing to invest in housing to a scale that we need. And I think the question before, the moral issue, just keeps coming up. I think we have this embedded thing in our society or in our system where we have the deserving poor and then the undeserving poor. And that plays through all the time. And you know, when you add the racism and the poverty and everything else to that I think our country thinks more about the undeserving poor probably don't need what we're not going to invest in that. We'll invest in those who are deserving. And I think that's ruining us in many ways.
Anybody else? And I don't know, Jim, if that's what the country thinks or if that's just what the man who's got the microphone thinks. Because I think there's a breakdown between the person who's getting the narrative out there, or the people, and the rest of us. You know, because we end up thinking everybody hates everybody, but I don't think it's quite like that. What do you guys think? I keep hitting my mic.
I do want to respond to that a little bit because I think similar to the blame game that I mentioned earlier, that tends to happen in systems of services, right? So you often have government-funded programs at odds with privately funded programs. The privately funded programs often come out of a gap and a need that they feel the government isn't fulfilling. The reality is all of it's necessary, and you can't spend your time condemning one or the other because it's all important. And one thing I think it's really important to note is that, you know, if so much of the responsibility does fall on the government, we're part of that government. And we fund so many government programs by allowing things within our own city levels to be okay. And what I often like to remind people is that if you truly care about this cause and you truly want it to be solved, it takes sacrifice. And this means, as I think it was Dr. Jim that mentioned, or it might have been Jason, the disparity of wealth that has just grown and grown and grown and grown. And that gap, it's impossible for one entity to fill it. It'll take all of us. And it's really, to your point, I think, you know, we all need to be on board with it, and we might be, and I hope that we are, but what we're hearing and what we're seeing in more public settings, maybe from like a vocal minority, is that that's not the case.
Right. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, you know, most of us here are from nonprofit organizations, right? And so we usually pick up where the government leaves off. I mean, that's the loose definition of a not-for-profit. We tend to be organizations that you give us a bucket of paint and some wood and we'll build it and we'll make it and we'll try hard and we'll recruit volunteers, and volunteerism is at the heart of much of what we do. But we're nonprofit organizations that are struggling to find the funding to keep going constantly. You know, what a lot of us have to do is go out there and figure it out and try to find the funding to do some of the very essential services that are needed in the various communities. So now you're losing effort from actually putting the work into solving the problem. So it's a bit of a cyclical issue, I think, too, in that we're constantly looking to figure out where to get our next dollar from, if I'm correct. Yeah. And then you're thinking, gee, there's a lot more work to do, but you can't do it without money and funding. And so the nonprofit sector does have to come together, and we do have to convene.
Okay. So let's get this on a real granular level. Each of your programs, each of the things that you've been doing, what works in your arena? Or, you know, what's the thing you're most proud of that you're doing that you think really is making a difference? And then the other part of the question, I'm going to ask each of you to tell me this: what's just not working? What have you got to change? Who wants to start there?
I can start. So I would say what's working for us is that we actually are able to build some buildings, and there are families moving to those buildings and supporting those families, right? That's working. And in 2019, we built, so one thing that we talked about the faces of homelessness, and Dr. Jim shared some really good stories, is that one population that we don't talk about, that's not a protected affordable housing class in the state of Massachusetts, is young adults. And so there's a large population of young adults 18 to 24 and above, because I believe you're still a young adult after under 30. And so what we found is that, I believe the latest study was 3,300 people were found in the last youth count who were during that age period. And so in 2019, we built a building called Harbor Crossing, which is non-time limited supportive housing for youth and young adults 18 to 24. And so to me, I think that's probably a thing that's working, is that we have designated a building that prioritizes young adults. That means anyone here at any age can apply. However, we're able to say, if you're 18 and the 66-year-old applies for an apartment, we're able to prioritize that 18-year-old. And so I'd love to see more affordable housing pop up for young adults, because what happens is they don't get their name on a lease, and next thing you know, they're 30, 40 years old, still in the same situation, and the cycle continues. I would say what's not working is that we're not building fast enough. We can't find enough land to build on, and there's just not enough resources. And so as, I forgot your name. James. Sorry, I work very closely with him, but it's past my bedtime. Yes, we are. I know Jason back when we were like doing direct service on the grounds, like somebody needs a bed, Jason. But you know, something that Jason talked about really resonated is the fact that we are nonprofits. There are never enough resources. There are never enough staff. Right now we have a young adult housing outreach coordinator position and role that's very hard to fill because we only got $40,000, and a lot of people aren't willing to be in the trenches for $40,000 because can you afford to live in a one-bedroom apartment for $40,000 a year? Exactly. So I would say that's what we need to do better.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes. Something, Rachel and I work closely, I'm on the Family Promise Board, and something that Rachel does really well is ground people when they're kind of thinking too big and panicking a little bit about all of the issues that we have and what the roots to those are. And I think for Family Promise, something that Rachel has said time and time again is let's focus on what we're doing, what we do well, and it might be right here in front of us. Maybe we need to put on blinders, but that's the goal. And it's incredibly valuable, like as a family, as a mom that went through Family Promise, it was, I'm only one person, but it impacts generations to be able to be housed. And so that will impact my daughter, and if she chooses to have kids, her kids' lives. And one other thing that I wanted to mention, kind of going back to meritocracy, is that if we are constantly climbing, there are people below us, and that perpetual system is incredibly harmful. We need to look at that, and we need to all take individual responsibility, stay in our lanes, do what we can. We need to pressure our elected officials to be passing anti-poverty legislation, and that is local, state, federal. But we need to stay on top of people, we need to stay engaged in our communities, and we need to build up like this people power, people that aren't interested in politics because it's a game and they don't believe that it's going to do anything. We really need to grab as many people as we can and be pushing towards anti-poverty.
Anyone else? You all can take this one if you want.
Sure. What's working? I think this is working. I think the dialogue is working. I think there is something amazing when communities come together to address such issues. I mean, in general, what's not working, I think we get caught up in simply admiring the problem. And we just talk about it, and we'll do more of this, and we'll wait, and what's next? I mean, what's not working is, what is the follow-up? And I just don't want to be part of something where we stop and keep admiring the problems that we're facing as a society. So otherwise, I think this is a great first step in that.
Well, I wanted to speak to it too, if that's okay. I'd want to touch on the fact that it's not working, and I don't want to be the Debbie Downer of the group either, but we have a very small staff at Family Promise. There's 4 of us, and as Jason mentioned, a lot of my job is just fundraising, and so the program staff is even fewer. And what we're experiencing, I'm sure all of us have seen it and have experienced it on this panel, is high burnout, and that's because the need has outgrown the level of ability to respond. And what I think that, I just totally lost my train of thought, like mid-sentence. Yeah, I know. I had a really good point. Burnout.
Just keep it living. That's going to happen more and more. It'll come back.
Honestly, I'll come back to it. Do you have something you want to add?
I'm not going to rescue you.
Oh, wait, no, I remembered. Okay. When your staff is constantly burning out, you have to, and you know what, I was going to reference Dr. Jim, the book, Rough Sleepers, if you haven't read it. One of the parts that really struck me was something that the nurse that you work very closely with, Barbara McGinnis, had, I can't quote the book, I'm not that skilled, but there was a point where someone was kind of saying like, well, how is the work that you're doing really making any progress, right? Because a lot of the clients that Dr. Jim had worked with, and what my own experience in working in the field, a lot of people just end up dying. You house them and they may die a few weeks later, and it can be incredibly demoralizing. And when we're working with the families through Family Promise, we can't house people right now. It's impossible. The numbers don't add up. We have families with full-time jobs that don't want to leave Massachusetts because that's where their babysitters, their support system, their family is, but there's no way to house them in Massachusetts. And so you start to kind of wonder, like, what is success? Because it's not keeping people alive, and it's not housing people, because it's really hard to do that. And what I often tell my staff is sometimes success is the fact that you were there for that person during their really difficult, now I'm like emotional, this has been a real mess, but you were there for them during that incredibly difficult time of their life. You were someone that they could call and vent to and say, I don't understand how to navigate these complicated systems of services. You guys have talked about the checklist, and oftentimes we're not able to house people, but they still send us emails and text messages and say, you guys changed my life. And I'm like, well, how? Like, we didn't actually change anything. And so that's success, but it feels like a failure. And it's really hard in this work to identify that as success when so much of our work is based on metrics and output and how many people are we housing. And like Jason was saying, when we have to fundraise and give you guys happy stories of all of our successful times we've housed people, but and that's how we get money to continue being successful, and it's become this kind of cycle, this system that just doesn't work. And so my success is kind of not a success, I guess, but I just wanted to share that. I'm glad anyway.
That's good. You did it. You did it.
I'm glad I didn't interrupt you now. That's okay, because that was beautifully said. You're reminding me of that Bob Dylan song, there's no success like failure, and failure is no success at all. You were kind of like into that.
I didn't even finish the Barbara quote. Do you remember it?
I think the Barbara quote, if I remember this right, so I was trained by a really amazing group of nurses led by a woman named Barbara McGinnis, and she was, beyond mythical in our lives. But I'll never forget, I was in the shelter working. It was crazy. This is 1985 Pine Street, and it had 800 people there. The clinic was absolutely insane. And I had come from a hospital where everything was kind of controlled, and this was totally out of control. And somebody would come up and ask Barbara, you're working really hard. What's the solution to all this stuff? And Barbara would turn around and she said, leave me alone, I'm too busy working. And I kind of think she had something there, that I think what most of us are trying to do is the best we can against impossible odds, but focus on the people that are there, that you're taking care of, and the relationships. So when I think of what's the success for us and our family, I think the privilege we have, and I'm coming at it now from a healthcare perspective, we get to follow people and take care of them for years, even though we are not able to get many of them housed. So even though we can't get them out of that situation, we can take care of them. So I say that is a success in some ways. So for example, we have 500 or 600 people with, that have HIV/AIDS, and almost all of them have undetectable viral loads because we have this incredible staff that makes sure that they take their medicines. Hepatitis C, almost everybody's cured now. When we had the vaccines come out for COVID, you'd be amazed, almost everybody on the streets of Boston got a vaccine. They didn't say no. And it was all because of relationships. It wasn't because of anything else. So that stuff, I think, is a huge success. But then when I step back and I think, God, I'm getting old, and it's, I'm on the other end of my career, I worry that nothing has really fundamentally changed at the level of the man. It's just when I think now that it can take 2 or 3 people with really radical ideas in Congress to stop everything, then I get very discouraged that we're going to be able to swing the pendulum toward, to the moral justice that we should be going for. So I hope that's going to change, but that's it.
I'll keep this brief. What works? Meeting people where they're at, not where you want them to be or where you think they should be. Because someone may not be ready for your solution. Keep that in mind. You can't meet people where they're at. What's not working? Coming up with creative solutions for unused space. Think of how many office buildings are empty. And I think subsidized to some, yeah. Let's think. So these people are being paid to keep these spaces empty. What can we use those spaces for? I wonder.
So creative solutions. This could kind of be a sidebar, and we're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions in just a minute, but I just wanted to ask you, Jim, I thought your storytelling was just brilliant and touching and moving, of telling us more about these people. We have a program that our church started called Can We Talk? And the whole idea of the program is just to let anybody and everybody come in once a week and just tell your story. And what you said was, you thought maybe the woman didn't want to have her picture taken, or you thought people didn't want to share, and it turned out, how can the rest of us benefit from that? What else can you say about the getting to see people with the dignity that everyone deserves from your vantage point?
I think, that those stories are the evolution of a long time, so I wouldn't have said that in the very beginning, okay? What I have, and this is another thing I learned from the nurses, I think when I first was at Pine Street and walking down the alleyway, I would be asked by everybody, could I give them some money, would I give them something like that, and I didn't know what to say. And I remember talking to Barbara and some of the other nurses who said, and now our board of directors folks, they say the most important thing is that please don't make us invisible. And I'm looking at those photographs over there that are taking invisibility away. And they just said, please just look us in the eye and say, I'm sorry, I can't give you any money. Or how are you today, or something. So the whole thing of learning to be human and see the humanness in the person in front of you, I think is the start to what's going on. And, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Time Out of Mind, but Richard Gere played a homeless man in this thing, and Richard Gere is pretty recognizable. And he was in his neighborhood in New York, and they made him into an elderly homeless man. And the cameras were up in the buildings looking at him. And he said he was in somewhere near his neighborhood. He sat out there as a homeless guy asking for money for 8 hours while they were filming. And he said not a single New Yorker looked him in the eye. And he went to Congress and testified about what is happening with the loneliness and the isolation. And I think that's what we all can have a part in. I think you don't have to give people anything. We love giving Dunkin' Donuts cards because it gives people a chance to get a cup of coffee, sit down, and even use a bathroom. But most people are just looking for acknowledgement, recognition, and I would urge you to do that. And I think that's when the stories begin to happen.
I think so. I think that you talk about not looking at a person who might be unhoused or who's begging on the street. I don't think any of us want to look at anybody's eyes. I think that we're all afraid these days. And I have a ministry called I'm going to look you in your eye. But I've gotten so aggressive with it that I'm worried about me now. So, so I don't know. We're kind of on the edge. We all need maybe to take a little time out and then start all over. I want to thank you guys for this part of this conversation. We're going to open this up now. I think we have a microphone that can go around to you if you have a question. Just raise your hand. I see hands up already. I do not see the microphone. You have to borrow a microphone. There are questions all this way over here to your right. And
all right. Hey, Jan, where are you? I have a microphone here.
you guys did a great job.
I'm going to pass this.
Hello. So I'm just wondering, what work, if any, has been done by this society to invite the people who are unhoused in Salem onto this board to speak as people who are currently experiencing homelessness?
Anybody? Did you guys hear that?
Well, I think the Charitable Society.
Oh, I didn't hear it. I didn't hear all of the question. Was that question to the panel or something else? I'm not sure. Could you stand? That would help me a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering what work has been done to kind of invite the people of Salem who are currently unhoused to these kinds of events to speak with their experience currently or otherwise by anyone really, for the society or for the panelists.
I didn't understand that.
We had all our mics taken away.
Not that we're complaining.
Yeah, I can say that I know it's sort of a question directed towards the society, but I personally was aware of several folks who were asked to engage on that level who refused to. And I think that, we don't want to create an environment where we're exploiting people either. So we were very sensitive to that from our end, just so you know, but there was effort made on that. Yeah, sure.
So specifically to this event, I agree with Jason. But I can say that our organization, we are a community development organization, and so we created a community-wide meeting called Unidos en el Punto because we're located in the Point neighborhood of Salem, where every community member is welcomed. We actually, I know no one's trying to mention the individuals that are living next to Wendy's in Salem. But we actually have a block party coming up next week. And so everyone keeps asking, what are you going to do about the people living in the tents next to Wendy's, right? That's right. So you know what we did? We invited them and we said, come on by. We also encouraged them if they want to volunteer. If you volunteer, you get a free T-shirt. And you want to volunteer, you get a free T-shirt and some pizza. But we invited them, and I think that's the reality is that, and I agree with Jason, I never want to put someone on Front Street without them feeling comfortable, but I think creating community spaces, walk-in services is really where we get our information from that helps us make decisions within our organizations.
I do, yeah. To Skylar's point, I do also just want to mention for everybody here, the experts are the people that are experiencing it or have experienced it. And there's a lot of wisdom there and a lot of solutions there. We need to be tapping into those communities for solutions. us up here, we think we're up here above it, creating solutions for those people doesn't work. And so I appreciate your question, and yeah, that's it.
Any another?
Does anyone from the Charitable Society want to? Oh.
My question actually for Liz Walker, and it's about what's the Corey Johnson PTSD Society about?
Okay, I'm having troubles hearing, so I didn't hear what's the Corey Johnson program about? Yes. Oh, the Corey Johnson program was started because of all of the violence in our community around the church where I was the pastor, and thanks for asking that. And people walk the streets looking like it's like The Walking Dead, because not just because of the murder that happened yesterday, but the murder that happened 20 years ago. Not just because of the addiction issues. There's collateral damage to everything that happens. And so we wanted to have the community be empowered to talk about its own issues. And we started this program called Can We Talk? And it was kind of in memory of Corey and all the other nameless young men who have been killed, but it's also just as an answer to the pain that we are in right now. I believe we're all just heartbroken and we don't know what to do. We know something is wrong, something is not working, and it's huge. And so one thing we can do, and this is not the answer, these people have the real answers right on the ground, but one other thing we can do is talk about it. Because when we don't talk about it, it just wells up inside. And then you come up with these little aggressive ministries making people look you in the eye. I don't think that's such a good idea. We've got to start talking about the things that are wrong in our neighborhoods, in our families, and in our hearts.
Thank you for that. Hi, everyone. Sarah Stanley. I'm the Executive Director at Hawk Healing Abuse, Working for Change. We know statistically nearly 80% of mothers who experience homelessness at some point in their lives have also experienced domestic violence. So I want to give some hope and some direction that if we address the experience of domestic violence and gender-based violence, we can start to get to some of these root causes. But we run a 9-room emergency shelter, and one of our biggest challenges is helping people transition out of the shelter. And I receive a lot of questions, should we invest in more emergency shelter, transitional housing, et cetera. And so I'd love to hear from my colleagues on the panel, if we were writing big checks, what do you think our best investment is for housing?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I think it's a little bit of all the above. I can tell you, I've had the opportunity to work with Hawk, a wonderful organization, and we have members in our Youth Build program that have also been clients of Hawk, and they need transient housing, which means that they may have to get up and go at any moment. But I do think it's a mix of all the above. We need more supportive housing. We need more affordable housing. And I think to the point, to Alphonse's point of, it really is what the individual needs. And so I think that wherever your heart is led to give, that's where you give at. But transient, supportive housing, shelters are needed, and all the above. And we need this, the rent is too high, that's all.
Excuse me. You've done a wonderful job of telling us the issues of the ground game, which is where you're all operating. And the underlying message always seems to be getting the resources and how it's such a struggle to do everything you have to do with the lack of resources. My question is, what kind of relationship do you have with people who can then speak to the higher problem in the country of getting resources on a national level? We're in the wealthiest country in the world. Why isn't there more money being apportioned to this? And how are you counteracting the narrative in so many states, the old welfare queen narrative that got started decades ago and is reverberating through today? How do you combat that to change the narrative to get more of a national will to give resources to you?
So this is a very loaded answer. So we get the people who are stonewalling out of office. First answer.
What is?
So I had this conversation, something related to this conversation earlier today, where I use the term Overton window a lot. And if those of you who don't know what it is, the Overton window is the particular view that we have of what is politically acceptable in our society. Our Overton window has shifted so far right in the past 40 years that what we consider far left is far right of center. Now, food, housing, healthcare, education, in this country, if we were to give those to people, in this country, that is some wild, far leftist idea. Actually, that's global centrism. Think about that. That's global centrism. Not far left. Far left is just taking it back. Not advocating for it, taking it back. So the people that are stonewalling, to answer your question, sir, we need those people out of office. That's it. Because they're not listening to their constituents. They're doing what they want to do for more power, more money. And that's the other thing. The people that have these insane, obnoxious amounts of money could write checks to solve a lot of these issues, but there's a problem that they have that I can't address. They always want more. There's never enough. Greed is the bottom line here. Greed is the big problem. If we can figure out how to solve greed, we'll solve all of this.
I want to add, because it is a very layered, there's no easy answer to that, and I think when you start to think of things on that level, it can feel really overwhelming, and a lot of times people freeze up and think, well, then I'm a nobody, I can't do anything. So there's a balance, because there's this idea that, we're all responsible, we all have to do everything, and also it's impossible to get anything done, because who are we to influence people that have the power and the ability to write big checks and things like that. And the reality is you can do things on a local level. Local politics are hugely important. I think that we get hung up on national politics in terms of making a change, but the reality is state by state, it is so incredibly different. The healthcare systems in each state, the systems of services. Massachusetts, for example, is the only state in the country that's a right to shelter state. That is a foreign concept to most every other state in the country, and that relates to family homelessness and a whole complicated thing. If you have questions about it, I'll answer them, but not right now. But I think what we need to do on our level, on the ground level, as Veronica was talking about, Veronica, for example, has put herself out there in the community of Salem and has run for office. She's currently pursuing a school committee position. She had pursued a city council position. And Veronica is probably one of the more introverted friends I have. But she recognizes that is something that's incredibly important. So she's put herself out there. And we all have the ability to do things like that. And if you're too scared to run for office, educate yourself on what needs to be done, understand the zoning laws of your town, understand the policies that are keeping housing from being built, understand what services are available to people that you could walk by on the street and offer those resources to people, and educate yourself, educate your friends, educate your family, because it's so easy to ignore this problem. And many of us do it because it's really overwhelming to think about. It's not, I think it's almost a coping mechanism to ignore so much of what's happening state by state and country, all over the country, but we can't really ignore it. And it's important for every single person in this room to understand what's happening, why it's happening, and then to talk about it. Talk about it at Thanksgiving or Christmas. Let your family be like, why are you talking about that? Don't be the downer. Do it. I literally talk about it all the time. People hate me for it, but just do it. Okay.
I just want to add one thing. Air it out. We need to continue these conversations. The only way to get rid of some of the shame and some of the things that we hold close, let it go. Be vulnerable, open up, connect with people. Air it all out is all that I want to add.
Absolutely. I'm going to let this gentleman.
Thank you. I'd like to actually direct my question to Ms. Moran and build on Mr. Wright's comments. I'm David. I'm a friend of Rachel's. What I'd like to talk about is the children. I heard earlier, are there 220 unhoused children in the Salem school system? Did I hear that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. So as a mother and as somebody going to the school committee, I want to talk about what I see as the interrelated triad. We've got homelessness, we've got food insecurity, and we've got access to health care. And particularly in the context of the children, what's working and what's not working in that triad in those areas. And I'm not talking about acute health care is one thing, but how about things like preventative health care, vaccines, preventative dental? Is that accessible to those students in the school, and how are we accessing that?
It's a great question. Thank you. From my viewpoint, I think that there are barriers to that type of care. Certain places in the city are not accessible, so that's a big problem. Second to that, families are time-strapped. There's a concept called time poverty, and so when people are spending so much, not only time, but mental and emotional energy on work, on trying to show up for your kids and not break down, on everything else that life brings, I think that it becomes difficult to kind of to be able to have access to those things and services. And I think one thing that I'm proud of as a new school committee member is the sense of community that the Salem Public Schools is really invested on creating, and not falsely, not in name only, but the work is being done to create a stronger community, to have the schools go into the communities and ask what they need, bring the services to them, as people mentioned. So yeah, there's barriers, accessibility, but building that sense of community is always like my go-to. I think we could solve a lot of world problems if we start like caring about each other.
In the 1870s, the Commonwealth built Danvers State Hospital. Unfortunately, it was closed down. The inmates there, the lunatics as they were called at the time, went out in the street and died, a lot of them. The other ones filled up, Paul, our jails, 50% of our jails, mentally unstable, and perhaps 80% of your population. My question is, how do we rev up DMH to realize that this was a mistake? Dukakis's administration, Reagan's national arena. It was overcrowding, understaffing, underfunding that eroded Dr. Thomas Kirkbride's 19th century vision, and it was a snake pit when it closed. But it needed to be fixed, not torn down and turned into condos. My question is, do you agree with me, number one? And how do we get it back? The 1870s, they had a better handle on how to deal with this problem. And they dealt with it. They dealt with it beautifully. Danvers State Hospital achieved great success in its early days. Great success. Unfortunately, we remember it when it was so overcrowded, underfunded, understaffed. It seems that it's...
I'm going to stop you right there.
Yes?
With all due respect and love. You made a statement that I don't know if I understood. Did you say 80% of the problem is mental illness? Is that, did I?
A huge percentage of our problem at our homeless shelters is mental illness.
Is that true?
And I think we agree with, I know it is with us.
Okay, I just
So
want to make
that's
sure.
anecdotal and
not
not universal.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, that's anecdotal, not universal, so we'll start there. Let's go back to the residents that were at Danvers Hospital. I probably would have been one of them on the spectrum. So let's start there. what was considered mentally unsound when this was built is quite antiquated. Now, to your point of whether or not they should have closed it down, no, I don't think so. I think that our mental health access in this country is abysmal. I think that we can solve this. Let's go back to what Rachel said. Get involved locally and get your elected officials, run for it yourself, and start putting in place the policies that are going to fix this, that are going to provide those funds, and they will bubble up nationally. Mental health being the common thread amongst the unhoused is a fallacy, and it's an insidious little thing that feeds into the deserving and the worthy narrative, and we need to divorce ourselves from that now.
I want to reiterate that because it can be a harmful statement. I think what we see for homelessness, again, is typically chronically homeless individuals that are outside stayers. That's what's visible to us, but it does not make up the vast majority of homelessness. I don't know the percentages offhand, and maybe Dr. Jim, you might, but typically the highest percentage of people experiencing homelessness are transient. They have maybe one episode of homelessness and then they exit and never go back, and that's on any given night. And it's important to know that because those situations of homelessness are rarely caused by mental illness. It's often caused by lack of healthy support systems, people that they can go to stay with or to help pay for something if they fall behind or they have a disaster that causes them to not be able to pay rent. The other thing to note is in the family demographic, we talked about youth and young adult homelessness, we talked about veteran homelessness, family homelessness. There's so many different kinds of homelessness, and the causes for each of those types of homelessness vary widely. Youth and young adult homelessness has one of the largest populations of the LGBTQ community because oftentimes children or young adults, people are asked to leave their families and because of the fact that they are gay or trans or whatever it may be. In veteran homelessness, I do think there is some mental illness and PTSD, but oftentimes it's just no support, nothing that they can turn to. And in family homelessness, it's often as the representative from Hawk mentioned, there's domestic violence, which is not related to mental health. There is low wages. There's the fact that they have another being and no childcare. We're not talking about childcare, but childcare in Massachusetts is as expensive as rent. The average childcare cost for one child in Massachusetts is about $30,000. The average rent of a 2-bedroom apartment in Massachusetts in Essex County is $30,000. And the wage of someone, a single mom on minimum wage, full-time, is $30,000 a year. That doesn't add up. So, mental health is definitely a factor in certain people's experiences, but it is not by any means the majority, and it's just really important to know that because it can cause people to have the wrong impression.
Absolutely.
The point I would, one of the points I want to drive home is, we can talk about the percentage of folks suffering with behavioral and mental health. It's access. I mean, we're talking about, my colleagues may know better, but it was a 3-month wait to get an appointment with a mental health clinician. And I think at one point it was 6 months. And that number rises depending on acuity and age. It's an access problem, right? There are folks among us in society, whether they're homeless or not, who can't get access. So I think how are we going to solve that? There's probably a lot of different, but let's start looking at our policies. Let's pressure our governments into looking at those things because we need more mental health clinicians, right? We need more people who want to do this work.
Jim, did you want to wrap up? Do you have anything you want to say?
As a mental health worker who's in school for mental health counseling, there are barriers to mental health counseling. It's actually really difficult to become a licensed mental health counselor because you need to work for free for an entire academic year. And that is a part of the program and a part of the licensing. You cannot become licensed unless you do that. And so a lot of people need to maintain their full-time jobs and also work for free and also take care of their family. And so there's so many barriers, and it's insidious, and it's in every single piece and fabric of our society.
I'm going to wrap this up and let Jim wrap this up. So no more questions. We're going to stay around for a little bit afterwards, and maybe you can get your questions then. But Jim, do you want to give us some wisdom?
Sure. I think the most important wisdom I could impart is now you know why Liz is my hero. Okay. And so why I came tonight. No, I think what I hear from all of the questions, I think, particularly that last question, I think that was all about mental health parity. You know, we should all be, you know, why is it when I have a heart attack I can go to the emergency room, get cared for right away, but if I'm struggling with a thought disorder, it will take me months to get any kind of care. It just doesn't make any sense. And you know, we just need to make parity. We need places for people. Our emergency room at Mass General will have anywhere from 20 to 40 people in the acute psychiatry ward waiting to go somewhere. There's just no place to go. So we need to recreate the system, maybe not exactly as they were before, but we need to recreate the system that provides care for people and also takes care of them in the community. Just a thought on that last one. But I would say, one, it's been an intense pleasure to be here tonight. The fact that all of you are here listening to this amazing panel, share what's going on here, and my honor to do this. You know, and this is exactly the kind of community getting together that I think we need all over to start thinking about this problem, understanding how complex it is, and then our solutions are going to have to be equally complex. We're going to have lots and lots of what we used to like to think of as like a mosaic of different solutions to solve the problem. So we need to listen to each other, at least you need to listen to what your questions are, and constantly be creative about how to do that. And do it all with you know, this is kind of like, these are our neighbors. These are the people we live with. We want to share with everybody and take care of everybody as we take care of ourselves. So I would leave it at that, but it's really Liz who has the right words to say.
Oh, no.
Okay. So.
Well, I just want to thank you all, and I guess if I sum up one more sermon, just one more, being here tonight, this is what hope looks like. So thank you all. Give yourselves a big hand. And Rachel? Oh, she needs a mic.
Thank you, all of you, for being here. It's just amazing. There was an amazing discussion, and I could sit and listen all night, but we're going to have a reception, so we've got to get to that. So I think we're all going to walk away tonight with an idea of how we can do our part in spreading the word and working on alleviating the problem of homelessness. So we're going to have a reception in the back until about 10 o'clock. The bar closes at 9:30. I just wanted to also mention that Dr. Jim's book is for sale right here, so go check it out and buy one. And also make sure you view the photographs from the Off the Grid project. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate it, and I think this is a great sign. There are so many people that want to do something about the problem.
That was great.